You are listening to the It's Your Time podcast, and I'm your host, Certified Life Coach Michelle Arnold Burke. In today's episode, I'm sharing a recent conversation with Rhonda Farr where we discussed when the skill set that makes you a rock star at work challenges your intimacy at home. Welcome to the It's Your Time podcast, the podcast where busy professionals like you get the practical solutions and support you need to gain control of your schedule so you can strive to be the best in your career, but without the stress and overwhelm. If you're looking to increase your energy and decrease your stress, you are in the right place. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to 2023, friends. Hopefully you had a great new year and you are still on track to accomplish whatever goals you have set for yourself. And I have a treat for you today. But before I get into it, I want to let you know I held a class over the weekend on closing out 2022 and planning for future you 2023. And you can get the replay if you would like help staying on track with your new goals. Simply go to michelleburkecoaching.com/2023 to receive it. And that's just the numbers 2023. Okay, on to today's podcast. You may have heard her here before, and I brought her back to start the new year because her episodes are always so popular. Today, I'm sharing a conversation I recently had with Rhonda Farr. Rhonda helps strong individuals, high achievers, create more emotional intimacy. She is amazing at helping these folks who are high performers in their careers, but maybe not feeling so hot when it comes to relationships. We talked about some of the challenges that high achievers face around intimacy and how some of the best skill sets in your career are often the ones that sabotage intimacy. We talked about feeling empty at home, and we talked about some gender and society rules that may play into this. And we just had some fun sharing personal stories with you all. So it is always such an honor to share these conversations, and I hope that you find some nuggets of gold to help you. Without further ado, enjoy the conversation. All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast, Rhonda. It's so exciting to have you here. Can you just start by introducing yourself in whatever way you think is best?
Well, I am Rhonda Farr. As you said, I've been here before, so thank you for having me again. Super excited. I do a lot of coaching in the emotional connection space. So you might hear me today talk about like intimacy and connection. And what I usually mean by that is our ability to connect emotionally. I think we talked a lot about that last time. And I think today we're going to dive into a little bit more about how our ability to thrive and succeed and excel really at work often sabotages that intimate connection that we really crave. I think all of us crave connection and intimacy and acceptance on a deeper level at home and in the relationships that matter most. So I mostly coach high achievers, high performers. Most of my clients are men at this time, but as you and I have both talked about, women can have this personality type and a need for awareness in this area too. Michelle and I both would consider ourselves on this spectrum over more on the male energy. Is that how you would say it?
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say that or masculine energy for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, we were kind of laughing before we started recording because I was like, oh, yeah, you mean intimacy isn't like on your list of things to do that you plan?
Check, check, check.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we might be talking about things that I might accidentally slip and say men or whatever, but this applies like to anybody who's out there who's really good at solving, accomplishing, like task checking. Like it applies to both.
Yes, 100%. And I think there are a lot of people listening that can definitely benefit from what you're talking about today. When you have your clients come to you, what do you think are some of the top skills that are great for their careers, but seem to be the challenge in the relationships, either at home or maybe even is it also with like friendships, perhaps?
Yeah, sometimes for sure it is. So for me, though, usually my clients will come to me because they have created this life that everybody thinks looks so amazing from the outside, right? Like they have financial security usually. They have like a safe, warm home and food to eat. Like they're not stressing every day, usually about their bills being paid. And they probably even have like earned some respect at work in their career. Like people look up to them. So they're in this position where people think they're living the good life, right? But it becomes really painful to hold on to that image or that persona when you go home and you feel empty. You feel this void because that skill set, and we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like in detail, doesn't equate to accolades, connection, and the quote, good life at home in your romantic relationships. And for sure, sometimes in friendships, but most of my clients come to me because they're craving intimacy, like true intimacy, sometimes physical, a lot of times physical, but also emotional. And they just don't feel wanted or desired.
And where would you say the tipping point is that they actually end up coming to you? Is it based on feedback from their significant other? Is it because it's that intimacy that they are wanting and missing out on? Like, where do you think is finally when they actually reach out to you and ask for help?
That's a good question. I would say sometimes both, right? Like sometimes it's just, it feels so painful for them. And sometimes they have gotten feedback from their spouse. But I will say about that, like they are often married to a spouse who is a little less dominant, not always, but often their spouse is a little bit more quiet, right? Their spouse often feels like a disappointment to them, like they can't measure up to their expectations, their high standards, right? Because to answer your original question, here's what happens. These high performers, they go to work and they're so good at accomplishing, right? They see a task that needs to be done and they know how to be efficient in getting that done. They are so good at recognizing the problems, the things that aren't working, right? Which is amazing in a leadership role. But I want you to think about coming home and all you're seeing in your family, this could be kids, this could be friendships, but especially in your spouse, like, oh, that's a problem. I'm going to critique that. I'm going to criticize that, right? And we get confused as high performers, or sometimes we're even called over functioners. We get confused because this skill set really, really works at our job. And so we'll keep trying to do it at home. Well, if I just call this out enough, if I just give them enough, quote, helpful advice, then they'll see it too. And then they'll change and then they will be happier and then I will be happier and the relationship will be better, right? And we keep doing it and doing it and doing it. Number one, that gets very exhausting for us. It's also like super painful when we try so hard and we think this should work and it doesn't. And then it gets really painful for them and they kind of shut down. They don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. Like I said before, a disappointment, like they're not measuring up. This causes a real disconnect in intimate relationships. So I would say it's both. We're both feeling a lot of pain.
Yeah, I could definitely see too when you think of like the high achiever in a fast-paced job, when they come home, it's not only trying to solve the problem, but it's also probably not taking the time to, like you said, hear and see what is actually going on with the other person. It's like, here I am, I'm just going to fix the problem. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yes, that's such a good point. We've probably all heard that little phrase, slow down to go faster. That is so hard for the people we're talking about, right? Because in their mind, it's fast paced. They get a big payoff and reward in one area of their lives, right? At work. And so when they come home, it's so tricky for the brain to make that turnaround, that shift, that, oh, if I slow down and be with this person, if I slow down and try to actually know this person rather than solve and fix and hurry to the next thing that I think we both want, like that's better. It's so tricky for the brain to make that shift.
Yeah, and even as you're saying that, I'm thinking of another example of a woman that I'm in like an employee resource group with, and I find this for myself, and I've talked about it on the podcast too. Like when I come home, there are these like gender society rules that we think that we are supposed to like come home and make dinner, and be the one to clean the house or whatever. And what she said is like all day long, I am telling neurosurgeons what to do. I do not want to come home and have to think about dinner. So it can also kind of be that disconnect, right? And like what are quote unquote expectations. And like, no, at the end of the day, I'm also sometimes just done.
Yes, I can really relate to that. Do you see that too in your personal life? Like,
Oh,
um,
100%. I'm always like, I am not doing dinner. There are certain things that I'm just like, I'll do dinner 2 or 3 nights a week, maybe, but I don't want to take the brain power to do it, right? I want to be able to, but this goes to your point. I want to be able to spend my time thinking about work stuff. So that's an interesting twist, right? Because that's exactly what you're talking about. Kind of then where is the connection when you come home?
it's really like muscle memory for my clients that it is not natural, right? Like this is something we have to practice over and over and over. We really have to slow down and be present in order to notice that we're doing that, right? Like when I come home, I have to be intentional about creating that emotional connection.
Yes. And when we were talking earlier, I think it's also, it probably looks different, right, for men and women. So you've talked about the intimacy part of it being maybe contact, sexual or not, maybe emotional. So it's just trying to also figure out like, what does intimacy look like for you, the individual, right?
Yeah, totally. That's such a good point. So, most of the male clients that I have will come to me because they're in a lot of pain, right? Like I said, they're externally like sized up, measuring up, right? Like we're talking multi-million dollar earners here that everybody thinks are so happy. One of my clients recently said to me, he's like, Rhonda, I hang around with people making like 7, 8 figures. It's just normal. That's what I do. He's like, but I want you to know something, most of us are empty inside. Like the world thinks that we are living this glamorous life. And he's like, in some ways, yeah, we are. But we've created this beautiful looking life, and almost none of us are enjoying it. Right.
Mm.
And so they will come, the male clients will come with this pain point of, here I am. I have to hold on to this leadership position. Like I have to put on this persona. They don't even really feel like they have a space to be human or weak or flawed. Right. And then they go home and they're just looking for this safe space to land, like somebody who will desire me for just me, somebody who will fulfill me. Right. Although we know they need to fulfill themselves, but that's what they think they're looking for. And that shows up for men more in physical intimacy, usually. Like that's their pain point. They're missing the emotional intimacy as well, but they recognize it more as, dang, like I got this beautiful life. My wife doesn't even want me. Everybody else thinks I'm great. Everybody else thinks I'm amazing. She doesn't desire me. And that is so painful for them.
Yeah, and I have to imagine it's a cycle, right? Because I see this, especially in sales, right? It's always chasing the number, for example. So, whatever the career is that they're looking to accomplish, and then they get that, and then the goalpost moves on them. So, then you're chasing that and chasing that, right? And to your point, like you'll never feel fulfilled if it's
Never.
always moving.
Never. Like this is a game that we play that has no final buzzer. Like it has no endpoint. You will not win this game through these external validations, right? We think we will. We think that's what we want. That's why these guys and some women, I work with some high achieving women too. They accomplish everything they thought they wanted. And when they get it, it's still not enough and they're still not happy. And then they're hanging around with bigger circles and inevitably there's somebody who has more and better, right? It's never enough.
Yes.
I don't
That's
want
so,
to,
yeah,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I just don't want to skip over your point because I was afraid my brain would forget it about the other side of what the women feel, right? Because they don't usually come saying, oh, physical intimacy, that's my pain point. Like the women feel like not emotionally wanted, right? Like not seen for who they really are. So for a high performing woman, they might be afraid, like, oh my gosh, if I outperform my spouse, then my spouse is not going to want me anymore. Or maybe that I'm going to outperform them and I'm going to be bored at home, right? Like for a high achieving woman, they're often craving just this intimate emotional connection where they can both be seen, they can both feel safe. Like for me, sometimes this shows up in my marriage. Oh my gosh, this can I tell you a funny personal story?
Please do.
Like I was talking to my husband twice this week and I was telling him things that I was like super excited about, things I was going to create and do. And he's like, oh, That's good. I'm sure you'll do that. Like, he was so supportive. There was nothing wrong with his answer, but like, oh, I'm sure that that'll turn out really good for you. Good job. Right. Like, and I was like, wait, what is that all? Like, come in this world with me, like, sit with me, like, get excited with me, know these things. So
Ask me
that
deep questions.
is right. Like, see who I am. So I was talking to one of my clients. Actually, this happened yesterday. And he said, it was so funny. I feel like I'm married to Alexa sometimes. And I was like, oh, really? Like, what do you mean by that? He's like, you know how Alexa will like answer you and they'll give like appropriate answers, like, but they're just like, oh, okay. Thank you for saying that. Or, oh, it sounds like you mean blah, blah, blah. Right. He's like, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just like, I want that deeper connection. And so last night, I was really excited about this book idea. And I said something to my husband about it. And he was like, oh, yeah, let's do that. Like, kind of like this. And he gave me like a hurrah, hands fist up. And I just like instinctively said, Alexa, more emotion, please. And then he started laughing. And I started laughing and I explained it to him. And he wasn't offended by it. He kind of knows. He's like, our conversational needs, our emotional needs are very different. But yeah, that might be the running joke now.
So funny. And I feel like I'm almost being a little bit called out because I feel like sometimes I am guilty of doing that to Mark. Like he'll be telling me something and I'll be like, oh, okay. And he's like, I'm trying to have a conversation with you. I was like, oh, I just thought you wanted like an answer, feedback.
Alexa, more depth, please.
That might be the tweet. Alexa, more emotion, please. More feelings, please. Oh my gosh, that is so funny. And I think a lot of times when we're in these situations, we want the other person, right? I think probably step one is maybe making the other person change. And then it just gets to be like, okay, finally we realize, and it may take years, like, I can't quite change this person. And I saw a quote that you recently posted that I thought was so perfect. It was talking about motivation being fueled from trying to change someone else, and that's called suffering, versus intent to have self expansion. So, can you talk a little about that? Because I think that's probably, people suffer before they get to you.
Oh, yes. I'm delighted to talk about this. Okay. So, the high achievers, the high performers, like we said before, they're used to fixing and solving, right? They see something that's not right. It's an amazing, beautiful talent that they have to dive in, get to work, and change the external circumstance, right? That is why they are amazing at what they do. Like we said before, we come home and we have a spouse, husband or wife, whoever, right? And we are really good at picking out all the problems. So this high performing brain goes, oh, problem? I'm good at solving problems. Let me call that out. Let me like get to work on changing and solving. The problem is at home, it requires us changing another person usually. That will never work. We can make requests of the other person. We can share our insights if we do it from a place of love. But when we say there's a problem to be solved in this marriage, and the problem is the other person's behavior, the other person's personality, the other person's insert whatever word for you. Yes, that will never work. And so what happens is when we're trying to do a job that will never ever work, we'll never ever have a positive solution, especially as an achiever or high performer. That is the epitome of suffering.
Yeah, I think it would be it's maddening. I mean, I have been guilty of trying to change folks in the past, and
Me too,
yes.
sister. Me too.
And it seems that it doesn't work. But when we figure it out, we will for sure have another podcast about all of that, right?
We will solve your dreams. They will all come true.
100%. And I think this is important to just go back to your point earlier of like needing to slow down, because I feel like it's all from good intent. You want to make the change and help that other person, quote unquote, fix what's going on, what needs to be different. So I do think it comes from good intent, but I think that it's just like so maddening. And if you just continue to attempt to make the change, attempt to make the change, attempt to make the change, and not stop to look within, like that's just going back to the same thing with moving the goalpost, right? You're never going to get it.
Never, ever, ever. And thank you for bringing up that the intention is good. Of course, it's well intended. Like I believe that these performers, they love their spouse. Like you and I know we love our husbands. It's not like we're like, oh, they suck. This is the worst thing ever. Like I'm going to tell them how bad they are. It's almost always well intended. It's just, it is ill conceived. It does not work. And when you're trying to solve a problem that can't be solved in the way you're doing it, it will be maddening, like you said. And I want to say too, to this point, like when we're trying to solve another person, it is actually squashing and sabotaging the thing you crave the most. So think about this, right? Like you want that person to desire you, to really desire you. The thing is, when we're trying to manipulate, control, change, they have no choice anymore. Like you are orchestrating it. And so even if they follow through with the actions that you wish they would, it won't feel genuine. It won't feel like it's coming from a place of desire. So your attempt to control and change them sabotages what you're craving the most.
Right. And that leaves you to a place of like, so when you have these clients that come in, what are some of the things that you suggest? Like they've tried all of this, they've tried the changing. Like, what are some of the initial steps that you suggest for them to be able to do that looking within or to make the changes for themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, spoken like a true performer, Michelle, my clients, I'll tell them, do you see what's happening? Can you see where your mind's going? Can you see how this is not working? They'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. Now, what do I do? Now, how do we
That's
stop?
so funny. I was totally called. Yeah, can you just tell us all how to do this now? Let's step 1, 2, and 3, and we'll get busy.
Yes, it's the paradox, right? Like, okay, I see it now. We need to stop worrying about solving, fixing, and performing. Now tell me how to solve, fix, and stop doing that, right? It's so interesting. Every one of my clients. And in fact, we all just laugh about it. As soon as we call out the patterns, we'll laugh when they say, okay, now what do I do? But to give some practical steps, because I know that's why we're here. First of all, it really is what I said before. You have to recognize and call it out. So here is maybe a question instead of a how I would ask your listeners. First, where do you see this happening in your life? Where are you trying to use your beautiful, amazing skill set that allows you to be a wonderful career-minded person? Where are you trying to bring those into your home, into your romantic relationships, or any relationship that is more personal? First of all, I would just make a list. Like, where do I turn on my critical eye? Like, who am I like creating this subconscious list for that if they would only do X, Y, and Z, my life would be so much easier and happier and we could move so much faster.
I just had a thought that maybe the question for some might be, when do I turn my critical eye off? It might be a shorter answer.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. What a great turnaround. Thank you for that. Yes. So I would first say, just start witnessing it. And whenever it happens, just start calling it out in a kind, loving way, right? Like we don't want to beat ourselves up for this. We want to just say, oh, there's where it's happening. And then when you notice it happening in real time, just call it out. Like, oh, of course I want to solve the other person. That makes sense because it's worked so well in other areas of my life. Of course, I think if they would just change, or if I could just get them to see that doing this differently would make our lives better. Like, of course I'm doing that. Just call it out with some compassion and understanding of why you're doing it. And I would do that over and over and over. I've been in this for a lot of years and I still do that. That's ground level zero awareness.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think that's just ties back into your slowing down to like be able to offer that to yourself, to be able to see it.
Yes. And many of us can look back into our childhoods, our early career life, like other areas of our lives and see like, oh, we learned that this was a good way to handle life. Honestly, like for good reason.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, because earlier you touched upon it a couple of times. And I think this learning kind of like societal, right? Like what we have been programmed as far as roles, like what the men are supposed to do versus like what the females are supposed to do. And I know we've talked a little bit offline about this, about how it's just like so ingrained that we think that it needs to be this certain way. And it doesn't. And like men should have the opportunity to have these conversations because it can be very painful. And on the flip side, for women, like you said, I don't want to outperform, outmake, like that keeps women playing small.
Yes, absolutely. Those things are so subconscious for most of us that it's so interesting. This is what I often describe to my clients. Like, I want you to imagine as a small child, like your brain is just open to learning. But as a kid, you don't know that. Like, you're a fish in water. You don't know you're in the water. So you're just open and you're receiving all these messages from your parents, from the television shows. There was no social media back in the day when we were kids, but like church leaders and community leaders, school, all the things. So your brain's wide open. You're just receiving with no filter all of these messages. And then, oh, by the way, the people that are programming your wide open brain and your subconscious have no idea they're doing it, right? Like, usually, sometimes at school or church, like, we're taught things intentionally, but so often, even if we're teaching messages intentionally, the messages that we don't mean to teach are the ones that anchor in more, right? So here we are, we're these kids as adolescents, and we're learning without knowing, and people who are teaching don't know they're doing it. And then we got all this willy-nilly stuff in our head, and we freaking live our whole lives by it without knowing it,
A
without
hundred.
questioning it.
Yes. And I think too, when we look back at like school, right? It's kind of like memorize this, regurgitate it, get your award. And like it's never like stop and think about what is your intuition saying or what do you want, right? Or what's important to you. And to your point, these people programming us have been programmed by people before them. So it's kind of like the
Yes.
generation after generation. Like we can leave some of that baggage behind. It's okay.
So true. I read this thing online. I don't even know who said it first, but they were talking about, oh, you know what a tradition is? It's peer pressure from dead people.
I think I saw that. Yes, 100%.
And it's kind of like this too. Like, these roles and these identities that we take on, it's just like all this baggage from dead people that we're saying, no, I will carry this around. I will not put this down. So, to answer your question, step number two, first is like start recognizing it. But step number two is then start deciding, like, do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to keep carrying this? After we get some awareness, then we give ourselves agency.
That's so important. And I think a lot of times, because it is so subconscious, and this is why you need that first step, is that you don't think you have a choice. Like so often we play this victim role, and that will never get you anywhere. Knowing that everything is a choice, even if it doesn't feel like it, right? It's us knowing we need to be able to see it to make that decision.
100%. That's what I always tell my clients. When you can have some awareness and you can slow down and stop trying to fix and solve, but just slow down and be in that moment and really start looking at your life, you give yourself the gift of agency. And you give your spouse and partner and people you love the gift of presence and being intentional in the relationship. You give both of yourselves that gift.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also a gift that you give yourself. Absolutely. And I think there's probably some brains exploding because it's like, wait, they're telling us to slow down and to not fix things. Like they are crazy. I'm with you. I feel like I've done this for years and there's still instances where I'm like, well, no, I'm just going to take care of this. Let's move on.
Totally. It's part of the human brain, right?
And I think to your earlier point, it's not going to end. We don't get there, right? It's not like all of a sudden you've been doing it for 15 years and now you're perfect and nothing else matters. Like you've arrived. It's always, if we want to evolve as a human, it's going to be a spiral of growth continuously. Hopefully. The alternative, not so much.
100%, right? 100%. It's just the way the human brain works. It's evolutionary, it's biological. Like, when we get those stress responses, that's what your clients will probably start noticing when they try to change. these habits or drop some of this old baggage, their body will feel emotionally threatened. And I know that sounds so crazy, but the brain hates to have its identity challenged. And for many of us, this has become who we are, right? This is how we've gained our acceptance into the tribe. This is how we've proven our value in the family or in the community or whatever. So when we try to put some of that down, expect your whole nervous system to vibrate and respond and feel like you are under some sort of threat. It's not a real threat, but it will feel like one.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, especially as we're starting the new year. And, people, and this is just kind of also in general, I think, we're starting the new year. People will sometimes make New Year's resolutions or they say they want to do whatever the new goal is. And maybe it is like improve their relationship, but you also have to be willing to leave part of the identity that you've had. And it doesn't mean that anything is wrong with it. It's just like, okay, that was that part of my life. In order to accomplish something new, I need to do something new.
Yeah. So here's the way I like to say that. In our childhood, these skills, they were very adaptive, right? They kept us safe. They kept us emotionally safe. For some of us, they kept us from getting yelled at by our parents. They kept us looking like the star in our small communities or whatever. These skill sets and behaviors have been very adaptive. It's just that when we grow up and our lives are different and we don't need that emotional like coddling so much anymore, we have our own families, our other relationships, it becomes very maladaptive. So here's the way I like to say it. Even at work, right? Like this skill, even at this age in your life, can be very, very adaptive for your career goals. But when you come home in these emotionally connected relationships, hopefully emotionally connected, right? Like it becomes maladaptive. And it's not wrong. It's not bad. You just need to be aware of what's happening.
And then be able to decide how you want to have it either different, or maybe you choose to keep it the same, but knowing that you are making that choice.
Totally. Because we feel like we're at the effect of other people. Like, oh my gosh, if they would this, if I could just get them to see that, blah, blah, blah. Right. No, 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 no. This really is for you to decide. And you're right. To your point, there are some people who just say, no, I don't want to deal with that. And they choose to be who they are without slowing down, having more intention, and like they're fine with it. But that needs to be an intentional choice or you will be suffering.
100%. I think so many people listening are stressed, overwhelmed, anxious. And this is like just one little facet of what could be considered more work life balance or work life integration, whatever you want to call it, knowing that it's not all of the changing of the externals, that it's you knowing and choosing what you want in your life. And that's where you're so much more empowered.
100%. And I would like to say, as we near the end here, a lot of your clients, as you said, are going to be like, wait, what? You're telling me to slow down? Wait, what? I just want to offer that if solving, fixing, critiquing were going to ever work in your relationship, you guys would have this figured out by now and you'd be super happy because you've been trying it for a long time, probably, and you're really good at solving and fixing. And if that skill set were going to be the thing to make you happy in your personal life, in your relationships, you would already have that figured out. So I just want you to consider that.
Such a great point. Have we missed anything? I feel like there's been a variety of things we've talked about here. Have we missed anything?
I don't know if we've missed anything, but I just love this conversation because I feel like what happens with many high achievers is they add an extra layer of shame and guilt onto themselves. I won't say that we miss that, but I do want to call that out. Like when the world says, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You are so privileged. Your life is amazing. You should be super happy. I almost feel like we get more shame. Like, well, why am I not happy? Like, well, if everybody only knew, like if people could see behind this curtain and then just makes us miserable. So be on the lookout for that added layer of
I think
shame.
that's so important. I'm so happy you mentioned that because I think sometimes simply taking that layer off can be so much more freeing.
I totally agree. You're just a human. Like, no matter how many accolades you have in your job or how much financial security you have or whatever, we all are just humans with a human brain with this number one desire to be accepted into this world, to be safe in our tribes, to be wanted and loved as we are. Like, you cannot out earn that, my friends. Like, that's the human condition for all of us.
Yes, it's what we're all signed up for.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
You can find me at rhondafarr.com. If you want to go check out some of the free resources that I have, you can find me on Instagram at @RhondaFarr_coaching. I'm also on Facebook, @RhondaFarr_coaching, but I'm more active on Instagram. So yeah, or, go find me there and send me an email and tell me what's up.
And we get to watch all of your fun family festivities with the boys over on Instagram.
That's right. I'm a mom of 4 boys and I have only brothers too. Like, I am steeped in the men's world. So that might explain a lot about my choices in who I coach and who I am as a person.
Lucky for them.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Thank you so much for being here. And I will put all of your information in the notes as well.
Thank you for having Michelle. I appreciate it.
Okay, wasn't that so great? I just love all of the excitement and passion Rhonda has around this topic. It's so funny. If you follow me on Instagram, at Michelle Burke Coaching, by the way, you may have seen I posted pictures of us during the interview, and she was all lit up. And I looked like I was shocked at what she was talking about. Perhaps I felt a little called out at times, right? But it's just all so good. This is what we want more of in 2023. Conversations that can help change the energy by which you show up in your life. Ways to help you feel better, to plan your life more, to feel less stressed and overwhelmed. And trust me that you are right where you are meant to be. And even more importantly, I want you to trust that for yourself. I will have all of the links in the notes. Be sure to check Rhonda at Rhonda Farr Coaching. I'll have the links including how to get the replay, how to get in touch with Rhonda. All of the goodness will be in there, so be sure to check it out. And if you need any other information, you can always reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. Okay, friends, that's what I have for you today. Use what works, leave what doesn't, and tune in next week for another opportunity to transform your life. Make it a great day. Take care. Did you know you can take this work to a deeper level with me one-on-one? Go to michelleburkecoaching.com and click on Get Started to begin.